Okay.
Everybody's drifting.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back from the coffee break. Obviously, I hope you could tell I enjoyed speaking to you this morning, but whenever I come to a conference, it's an even more enjoyable opportunity to learn from people that are actually implementing everything that you've been talking about and other speakers have been talking about. So it's my distinct honor to have Patrick and Paul here. I'm just going to spend literally 30 seconds introducing each of them and their firms, which you probably know both of them pretty well. And then I'm planning on spending 10 or 15 minutes asking a series of questions to them as the moderator. But then this is now the time to start thinking about the questions that you have, because I'd like to spend no more than half the time asking questions, and I'd like to leave the other time to you as an audience. So let me start with, to my immediate left, Patrick Venning, who's Managing Director of Pernod Ricard.
I only wish I was.
Marketing Director. Marketing. Well, I'm sorry, I've promoted him already. Marketing, thank you. Marketing Director. Although, of course, from where I come from, marketing is above the dean. So I believe, of course, marketing is the highest possible role you could have. Pernod Ricard, as many of you may know, recently celebrated its 40th anniversary this year and has established itself as obviously a leader in the wine and spirits industry. Their portfolio, I was thanking Patrick during when I first met him for many of the beverages that I enjoy quite much, which include Martell Cognac, GH Mumm, Absolute Vodka, Jameson, etc. And it's hard for me to believe, but they do this with, it says 18,000, I would have guessed a lot more, but 18,000 employees worldwide. Patrick joined Pernod Ricard in 2004 as the head of marketing wines before taking on the responsibility for marketing spirits in 2007, and he was subsequently appointed as marketing director. I'm also happy to read, it was very interesting, I was happy to read in his background, he has a very traditional, if you'd like, CPG background, having worked at both Procter & Gamble and Unilever, and when we think of traditional marketing consumer packaged goods companies, those are on the Mount Rushmore. Those are at the top of those companies. So why don't we welcome to the panel Patrick Venning.
Thank you.
I also have the distinct honor of introducing Paul Morris, Head of Digital and Social Media for the Co-operative Group. Just a little bit about, my guess is if you're British, you probably know everything about the Co-operative Group, but I'll say just a few words. Apparently it's a cooperative, which means it's owned by its members, which apparently number roughly 6 million plus, I guess, countrywide. Apparently it can trace its roots back, and that's why I love that Paul is sitting here today telling us about digital marketing. This is a company that's been around since 1844, and they're emerging into the digital space, which is wonderful. Paul's worked for 14 years in the digital space, being in the cooperative group for the last 3+ years. He heads up internal digital, and a social media team, and their work with partner agencies to develop strategy, plan activity, execute and optimize activity for the cooperative group and the cooperative business units. Paul also has experience, which I hope he shares with us, both from the client and agency side. So without further ado, let's welcome Paul Morris. So I figure let's get right to the heart of the matter. Let's get right to, in my view, there's lots of important questions, but I'll start with the first one. Could you talk to us, maybe we'll start with Patrick and then I'll move over to Paul. Could you tell us about the role of digital in your company? And as I was saying to Mike, one of our hosts here before, the reason I love having if you'd like, a beverage manufacturer here and a company that owns many different industry verticals is you wouldn't necessarily say, wow, of course they're doing digital. I think the fact that they're doing digital signals to me, I hate to say it this way, but if they can do it, you can do it. So Patrick, maybe you could talk to me about the role of digital at Pernod Ricard.
First of all, thanks very much for the lovely introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Digital is fairly critical for us, Pernod Ricard. Obviously, the types of brands that we're in, lifestyle business is very important for us to be right in the midst of people's social lives, right in the midst of lifestyle, the lifestyles that our target consumers exist in. So we spend well over 50% of our A&P now on digital, and that's in a very short space of time. Last 4 or 5 years ago, I was looking back, we were probably maybe about 5 to 10%. We dabbled a little bit in Facebook, and we spent a few quid on ECRM. So we've travelled quite an accelerated journey over the last 4 to 5 years. And there's a bit of a mutual name check. I don't know if Dominic from Boston Consulting Group is still here, but he put up the fact that we work with BCG a little bit, more predominantly in France, on a number of our brands. But there was a real watershed moment for us, and we had a new CEO come in about 5 years ago. And we were talking about the brand Malibu. I don't know if anybody drink Malibu here? Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much.
But I do see some people laughing, though.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason for that. But we're doing some work on Malibu. We interviewed 21 to 24-year-old young female consumers up in Liverpool, C2DEs, and as you can imagine, that was quite an eye-opener. And it really hit us between the eyes how much time they were spending on Facebook. And not only the time that they were spending on Facebook, but why they were spending that time on Facebook. And they were doing it for all manner of things. They were doing it to connect with friends. They were doing it to find out what each other was wearing. They were doing it to understand, what locations they should be at. And so, new CEO at the time, who doesn't really sort of sit comfortably with the whole digital acceleration, but he trusts in the knowledge of the marketeers in terms of, that's the way it's going. So we really need to get on top of this. More and more consumers are using these types of social media platforms. Let's take a fresh look at the way that we're doing things. And that's what we did for about 18 months. Try and sort of reorganize our department, reorganize the way that we were doing things. And we did a bit of work with some external agencies to help us on that.
My major takeaway, I'm sure we all had that's a very interesting story. My major takeaway, there's two, one I'll say now and one I'll save for a second, is you gotta go where the customers are. And if the customers are on social media and you're not getting the customers. And that was very intriguing the way you said that, given how you talked about how much time people were spending on social media. Paul, let me ask you the same question about the Co-operative Group. Again, we mentioned, most people think of a 170-plus-year-old company. They're not thinking digital media. So maybe you could tell us about the role of it at the Co-operative.
So digital for us is sort of multifaceted. So the first one is we're a member-led organisation, so we're supposed to do what our members are telling us to do. So we use that just to communicate and connect with them via social means. We also, for relatively simple things that hasn't been simple for many years due to our more traditional background, is simple things like voting. So for voting promotions, etc. So connecting in that way. We use it and we're increasingly doing a lot more with colleagues. So we've got 68,000 colleagues throughout the group, and to try and use digital to connect those. So we're using, I don't know if many of you are using, you've probably all heard of WhatsApp, but we're using that, and we're also using a product called Slack. So we're using different platforms now to connect our colleagues together. I don't know whether any detail will be asked later, but we're finding massive success in how that can transform the business. We're also using digital as a way of sort of freeing us from our desks and making remote working a lot more easy. So things like putting more stuff, like reporting in the cloud. So we're doing that a lot more simple home working. So we're trying to free up the desks a lot more. And then again, more my bread and butter from my agency background was acquisition. So we're doing a lot around whether it be programmatic, SEO, PPC, affiliate, paid social. So we're doing a lot more around those areas as well. That's kind of the bread and butter for the co-op that we've been doing that for quite a few years.
Let me ask you just a follow-up question to that. Do you find out that your 68,000 members are kind of learning from each other? Is that one of the benefits you're seeing? Like, what worked for me might work for somebody else. Why not share that with my non-competing cooperative members?
Yeah. So I still think we're at the start of the journey. So that's what we're trying to do at the moment, which is connecting them a lot more. So we're using, we've had blogs in the past that have been just put up on simple WordPress sites where we're trying to connect them. One of the products that we've done is called Let's Talk, which is exactly that. So we're trying to connect them together. And then we're doing a lot more through, in particular, Facebook and Twitter. So we're doing a lot of data feeds into their platform from email and mobile. So we're trying to feed it into the big mixers and then trying to talk to them and target them more effectively by I wouldn't say one-to-one messages, but certainly at least pretty targeted segment-based stuff through those platforms.
I'm sure a lot of people are sitting here asking, I think, a very natural question. When I was hearing both Patrick, you and Paul speak, I was thinking, I would have been thinking, if I were sitting there, how do I get started? And Patrick, I heard you in your opening comments mention that you had a CEO that came in and kind of, maybe this person just buys into it. And if you don't buy into it, it's going to be hard. But could you maybe just tell us how Pernod Ricard got started in this movement? And then, Patrick, I'll ask you the same question, if there was any impetus that may have driven you to this.
Yeah, well, if I speak from a UK perspective first, simply the fact of hiring in a digital marketing manager. So we didn't have anybody solely focused on digital before. Hiring in a digital marketing manager was probably about the best thing that we did about 4 years ago. And that for me, and subsequently we sort of built up the digital department, and we've got probably around six people now solidly focused on digital disciplines. But it's about bringing in the expertise, but also upskilling the whole department as well. And
so how do you do that? I mean, how do you take old guys like me that, were trained, although I'm a professor of marketing, let's ignore that for a second. I come from a traditional survey-based marketing background. How do you re-educate your workforce?
Slowly. I think it's an engagement journey. You have to take them on a journey. You can't always go at the same pace with everybody. So you've got a marketing team that wants to go at 100 miles an hour because they're young and keen and ambitious and recognize that this is the way forward. And then you've got maybe heads of other functions that are fairly happy with the way it's always been. And I'm sitting here today on a Google workshop, but tomorrow we've got the whole of our XCOM being hosted by Google, just as part of a digital immersion project. But again, there's a story that I tell, which is our CEO, who doesn't really do Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, anything. But I put Instagram on his iPhone. I just got him to follow 4 brands. One was Leinster Rugby, the other was Life in Sheen, the third one was this local pub, and I can't remember what the fourth one was. So just to get him to use Instagram. And then he started to follow the brands, and now he's regularly. Well, now he stopped thinking it's an invasion of his privacy, which is a real milestone for us. So it's about taking them on a journey with us, but it's also making sure that you're not talking, kind of digital terminology all the time, acronyms, all those kinds of things. For those of you who know what a DMP is, data management platform, we've had that in the business now for about the last 12 months. And simply explain to people that it's nothing more than a glorified spreadsheet that can be stretched every which way to try and target your consumers more effectively. Putting it into layman's language is the way forward, because the moment you just try and profess to be this digital expert using all the digital languages, when you lose people very, very quickly.
Actually, what Patrick says is very interesting. One of the things I do, I actually run a program between Google and Wharton, and one of the things I do with the young people that come in is I say, look, for the next hour, everything we talk about, if you say one piece of jargon that is Google-centric or something I don't understand, and I think I'm a semi-intelligent human being, I'm going to hit a buzzer. And the buzzer must go off like 500 times, because people, especially in the digital space, we can't help but talk in the jargon we know, and all it does is it makes other people nervous and alienate. So it's interesting you put it that way.
I'm smiling a lot through that, and that's exactly.
There's a lot of buzzers
exactly
that go on.
To watch, so, yeah.
So Paul, could you tell us at the cooperative kind of, what was the major impetus for you guys to kind of emerge towards digital?
We had a pretty major one, which was we managed to lose, and I'm smiling, I don't know why I'm smiling. We managed to lose as a business £1.5 billion in 2013, which is a pretty big stimulus for you to change. We, without going into the reasons behind why, that was a massive stimulus. We'd also had, I don't know how much you're aware in the news, but we've also had a new CEO that arrived in the business a couple of years ago. And he was ex-finance director at Morrison's. He was a big turnaround expert. And actually, the great thing for him was that he was a CEO that, whilst having more of a financial background, was actually on boards of digital businesses. So the Hook Group, for those that know that, is on the board there, and a few others. So we had him that kind of, the board took a step back from the massive jolt that we had to the business. They then reassessed kind of simple things, which is like, what should our mission statement be? What should our purpose be for it was always the members, but what should it be around? We then looked at a roots and branches review of our structures. So we literally went through something called a TOM, which I don't know if, and again another acronym, a target operating model. So that's essentially, both redundancies but also hires and a complete rework of our structures. So we did that. As part of that, as much as, so I'm in charge of a central team of 25 people and quite a lot of contractors that work for the team as well. We've also got subdivisions of digital experts as well. But from a transformation expert perspective, we needed somebody to be frank, of a sort of a higher caliber. We've got a gentleman that's joined, that's my new boss, called Mike Bracken. So he's ex.gov. He's a transformation, if you were to look him up, hundreds of people have worked for him in the government. So it was the stimulus and he was a chief digital officer. It's the first time that we've had somebody of that caliber, to be frank, put on the board and that's in charge of something so key. And so we are now starting to, we're in the middle of quite a pretty exciting time, which is completely re-looking at what the business should do, and we are starting to take digital first, whereas before it was more of a support. So during a lot of my tenure where I've been leading the team, it was more support. Now Mike's driving it from a more senior level and has got that buy-in, so that's really helped us.
So let me ask one last question to both of them, and then I'll kind of single out them for questions, not in a negative way, but I'll single them out based on the industries they're in. Patrick, could you tell me about how do you know it's working? I know a lot of people say, we've tried some digital stuff, but it doesn't seem to be effective. I don't know, maybe they're thinking too short term, maybe they're not waiting long enough. What kind of metrics do you have? Like, what's making you think that this, now I think you mentioned over 50%. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you know that this is a good thing that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $64 million question. That's probably also the reason why we've been a bit slow to embrace digital. I will come back to answering the question, but we're a company that's been successfully run by French financial accountants, and anybody that knows French financial accountants, they're very, very good. So it's very easy to take a traditional media plan to your boss and say, this is what we want to do, and we can measure it through traditional measures. It's more difficult to take a qualitative piece of research to say that 21 to 24-year-olds in the north of England use social media extensively, and therefore we should switch investment out of TV and into social media. So the development of measurements, and we've got all kinds of dashboards, Sprinkler and
we're looking at using them. I'll have to ask for some advice.
Don't come cheap. Sprinkler and various engagement rates, obviously through working with our media agencies that can help us to support those. But it's not a situation that we are entirely comfortable with at the moment.
It's an honest answer.
It is a situation that leads to plenty of discussions with ourselves and our finance departments about how we measure the ROI on A&P investments. So we've got a big piece of work going on a number of our brands to try and understand how we can make those, how we can isolate and understand the more direct impact that digital can take. Now, contrast that with a brand, and I mentioned Malibu again, which is now almost entirely digital in the way that we go to market with it. And we've now taken it over the 4-year period since we relaunched, almost exclusively digital, and taken it from a 15% decline down to a 2% growth, and a 2% growth in the on-trade, which comes irrespective of promotions in the off-trade. So, to my mind, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. It absolutely is working. Trying to isolate individual elements of digital is more difficult. You have to then ask yourselves, well, what you've got is a total digital plan delivering against your traditional brand funnels in terms of awareness and consideration and trial. Then it has to be having an impact. I think the last point on that is the focus in certain areas around last 3 feet is now catching up, right. And last 3 feet point of sale is now catching up in terms of that being more digital as well. So whether that's through mobile technology or use of iBeacons within some of our on-trade customers, that whole area is now catching up as well.
Before I turn it over to Paul to get a similar answer from you, like how do you kind of know it's working? I love what Patrick just said, because I've heard this before, but now, it's one of those deja vu all over again things where you said, if you're going to be in digital, at some point you have to recognize you must measure things in the traditional metrics that people have. If you want to just create your own set of metrics and just live with those and say, oh, don't worry that awareness is down, don't worry that desire is down, don't worry that purchasing is down, well, eventually people are going to say, there are these traditional metrics for a reason. So I love that you pointed out that there has to be this crossing point between digital expenditure and traditional metrics. I think that's a great insight. Paul, maybe you could talk a little about the cooperative. Like, how do you go sleep well at night, knowing that, especially in your case, you're running digital marketing in general. How do you sleep well at night knowing your expenditures aren't wasted?
Yeah, so so looking at acquisition channels, so we'll do a lot of work with multi-click attribution, so we're using Google and some other tools for that. That's working well from areas such as affiliate, PPC, display. We're relatively smart there, online at least. So with businesses like we've got an insurance business, so that works really well from a multi-click attribution. We've also tied in phone tracking with the business, and we're also doing with one of our media agencies a lot of econometrics, a little bit hit and miss, but we're starting to understand the online offline interplay. We do have some other businesses that, to be frank, digital is still a massive, along your lines, quite a challenge. So the food, so we've got 2,800 food stores, they're convenience, we don't trade, apart from a few small trials, we essentially don't trade online. So that's quite a difficult beast to measure. So some of it's really kind of not, I wouldn't say overly smart and quite pocket. So I mentioned WhatsApp before. We're using WhatsApp to a degree to connect some managers across, in particular in our food stores. So we did a trial in South Wales. We connected them over, it was around Mother's Day. There were a lot of managers of different small convenience stores in that area, and it was around flowers. So we connected them all. They basically had a competition to see who could have the best displays, who could sell the most. There was a buyer in those forums that then commented, you need to take the flowers away from the coolers because it'll put them off. Various kind of engagement way. And that small little mini trial that we had, that area of the country over-indexed double digit, I think it's about 15%, more sales than any other part in the country. So we could measure it at a very small, relatively hyper-local level that it made a difference. I think the challenge that we've still got is for funeral care, as an example, and food, we've still not done any ROPO, which, again, acronym time. So this was something that Google was particularly talking about, I think it's about 4 or 5 years ago now, which is research online, purchase offline, and online-offline interplay. We did a major study with the bank, which was basically, what's the point of doing things like affiliate marketing when it never, I'm dumbing it down, when it never costs in. So we started to understand the online-offline interplay via quant and qual research, and we proved categorically, and it completely changed the way that they marketed by product, so mortgages, loans, etc., that it made an impact in the percentage that we understood. So that changed the way that they started to market, whereas before they were looking at cutting off channels, and I still think we've got a way to go to do that with some of our other brands. So a work in progress.
Okay, let me ask a question now specifically to Patrick. I think when most people think of Pernod Ricard, we think of great brands. As a matter of fact, I hope that makes you smile. I mean, you've built great brands. How do you address the audience here where they say, can you really build great brands through digital? Like, doesn't that kind of, I hate to say it, but it's almost dehumanizes the brand. So could you talk maybe about the role of building brands online when, in some sense, there's lots of cognacs and champagnes and vodkas people can choose from. How do you use digital to build great brands?
I mean, I would probably have to completely disagree that it dehumanizes the brand, because the thing
I'm throwing out a question I knew you'd disagree with. It's not like I didn't know. I'm playing like the straight man. You're the funny man.
I wish. I think with our brands, the majority of them come with a very sort of strong background, authenticity, and provenance, and therefore they've always got a strong brand character, a strong brand personality, and that's what we can do with social media and video content, and that's really probably where we put the majority of of our spend. And I think you can really develop up a personality for a brand. And it's funny, I mean, we looked at some of our wine brands where it's more difficult to develop a personality because it's so promotionally driven, the whole wine category. But in our spirits brands, you know, brands like Jameson and Absolute, you can really look to develop a personality for the brands, small video content. I mean, it's amazing that the brand companies that we work with 5 years ago were delivering 60-second ads. 60-second ads. Well, have you developed up a 15-second ad? No, we want you to use the 60-second ad. Well, don't you know that costs you 4 times as much media money? Yeah, but you get the story across. Those days have gone, absolutely gone. We want 100 pieces of 10-second, 15-second contact. We need it to hit home in 3 seconds, otherwise people will fall out. You need to also press the silent test as well, so they can, people don't often have sound on if they're looking at video content. Social media, very different campaigns that you can run. You can dial up the product credentials, you can dial up the lifestyle imagery that goes with that as well. So I absolutely think it is the way forward for the majority of our spirits brands, and I can only see us going one way with this as well.
Yeah, I've always said if you want to see bad marketing, take a 60-second ad and just plop it online. That's as bad as it gets.
Yeah. I think it's a challenge though, isn't it, that when your traditional marketing team will shoot them in that way. So with food, we're really trying to they're aware of it, but to re-educate them. So things like TrueView is a real challenge for us at the moment in food, because we're still putting adverts out there first. We're not putting digital first. So again, we've got a way to go that I think we need to really start looking at simple things like the first 5 seconds of an ad and how captivating that is, rather than just sticking what you've got on TV in there. But it starts with the ideation of the idea and the shooting, doesn't it?
So Paul, let me ask you a question. Many people in this room don't only control digital budgets, but they control more of the larger marketing mix budget. How do you even start to think about how to compute, whether it's ROI, return on investment, or, I'll make it up. Let's imagine you have a $10 million budget. How do you spread it across these channels? How do you even begin to start thinking about that?
Can we not just have it all on digital or? So we're reasonable at tracking, so we track. So Funeral Care have recently just recut their budget for next year. So they worked it from what returns from pay-per-click, affiliate, display, affiliate, the impact of brand that we can have from things like programmatic display. We don't really do much homepage takeover stuff, local ads, and we try and then work with, we've got a couple of different media agencies, Rocket PhD and MediaCom, and then we try and work with them from this econometrics piece to understand that mix. I still think that we're on the way to working it to, again, this is just a personal comment, where I believe that digital should be, and that's perhaps taking slightly more share of budgets, but we're well on the way to that. Whereas if we were to look at some of our businesses like Funeral Care a few years ago, again, quite a traditional business, and how they've moved, and how they're spending a lot more time on SEO and PPC. That never would have been the case a few years ago. So I think it's kind of this prove element. If you can start to prove it and you can show some of the results, that's the way that we do it.
I think Paul, you made an excellent point, which is if you know how much to spend, and if you can measure it then across the different channels, now you have the possibility, whether it's through econometric modeling, et cetera, of computing the ROI of different spend, and now you can decide which ones to dial up versus dial down. Without that, you're just kind of guessing. Yeah. I have one last question for our panelists. That's the signal also to the audience to get your questions ready, because I'm about to stop asking questions, but I have one last question. And I loved all my questions, but this one's my favorite question. What's the one thing about digital that you used to think was true? Matter of fact, you were so sure that it was true, but now you're absolutely sure it's patently false. So maybe just to slip the order, Paul, why don't you go first? What's the one thing you used to say, oh man, I know that's true, and actually it turns out totally false?
Take your time to answer this one. Wow. Just to give me a little bit of time.
So I would slightly disagree with your entire presentation that you gave earlier.
Okay.
How about that?
All right, that's a good start.
So I saw a few months ago somebody on stage, and he was taught, his book was, I can't remember the name of the chap actually, but he was talking about being a business romantic. This sounds a little bit kind of twee, but it was about the kind of the overuse of data and the datafication of not effectively telling stories effectively online. So I think data is awesome. You know, everybody's saying that, you know, data is the new oil, and I do completely agree. But I think we've just got to watch at that mismatch that everybody flicks to this data card, and that then we're not, you know, we in particular next year are really working on telling a lot more storytelling online, whether that be via Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or Pinterest or Snapchat. You know, we're already trialing some of those at very much an iterative process at the moment. So I'd just say that the data thing, which I love and is kind of my geeky background, I just think that you've not got to watch that you bet all of your cards on that, and then you sort of kill any romance or storytelling out of your brand, because if we're not you go to brands for a reason, and if they're not there to engage with you and tell effective stories, then you just move on to somebody else.
So let me just say two things. One, not just to defend myself here, but I would agree with you in the following. I think data can only bring you to the precipice of the story. It can tell you the kinds of things that are likely to be effective, but it can't tell the story. And actually, one of my colleagues, Jonah Berger, who many of you may know, he's got a book called Contagious. And the thing he talks about, it relates also to the other Patrick, the head of the zoo. Is Patrick still here? Something he talked about earlier during his presentation was the idea that for something to become viral and be contagious, it has to tell a story. And if it doesn't tell a vibrant story, it's probably not. So I'm agreeing with you that I think data can take you to the what could be an effective story, but eventually brands have to tell a story. So Patrick, any thoughts? What did you used to think was true? Now, of course, if you say my presentation again, then it's going to start to hurt a little bit. But anything you thought was true and now you're absolutely sure is not true?
Well, allow me two things. The first is consumer journeys. Old school thinking was that consumer journeys were linear, and the consumer received the messaging that they wanted to from your awareness drivers, whether that's television, print, out of home, or whatever that was, and then they went in store and then they purchased, whether that's in a pub, bar, restaurant, or a supermarket. I absolutely think that's so not true anymore. Yep. That people are going back and forth, and therefore, you know, the consumer journey.
Did you take my MBA exam last week? That was question one, which was dispute the linear model of customer journey. All right, that's good.
Yeah, it's. I mean, research shows it's just not that difficult to do anymore, because people are, you know, you use the term ROPO. You know, people are going back and forth. People are using the powers in their hands now to make a more informed choice. And so that would be number one. Number two is more of a structural thing, which was 4 or 5 years ago, I never thought that we would have taken so many disciplines in-house. And I remember arguing against having, you know, social media, ECRM, data, copywriting services, all of those, you know, in-house, take advantage of, you know, the agency environment. It's more inspiring, and, you know, they can take on all of the difficulties that run with creating an agency environment, and we can buy those services in. And now I look at our organisation, and you know, we've got 3 people on social media. We've got our own copywriter. The team are now putting together their own production facility. We're talking about bringing ECRM in-house, and so, you know, the world is moving, you know, so quickly. But 5 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that would have happened.
Thank you for that. So this is the time I'd like to open up to you, the audience, for questions that you might have for Patrick and or Paul. Questions from the audience here? Please.
Sorry. Hi. I've spent sort of the last 7 or 8 years primarily in small box retail, convenience stores and so on. And I'm interested particularly from Paul's point of view in terms of what's the role of not being involved in digital in particularly the co-op stores, because you sort of see everything's heading in that direction for all the reasons we've heard today, but traditional media, point of sale, etc., still is very, very powerful. And one of the concerns I've always played and balanced with is, when do you not move digitally and stay in the traditional world, which is still how a lot of people are behaving. So I'm interested in your views.
Yeah, so we've toyed with so click and collect. We did some trials in, and broadly when we were doing them, we were very much questioning whether they were going to be a success or not. But I don't think it's always right just to back everything on digital. And we're doing like some fundamental things, but things that we should have probably done quite some time ago. And, you know, I hold myself probably accountable for that, which is things like what's the purpose behind the website? So I talked about this ROPO study that we did for bank. We absolutely need to do an understanding of the role that digital plays from convenience. Is it just that they're just trying to find a phone number, or when it's open? Do they want to go in store? Do they want iBeacons? I think the thing that we've got to be, there's technology there, and we're using, we've got kind of what we're calling stores of the future. So we're trialing some of these things in. And I love technology, so I love the thought of things like iBeacons. But if people fundamentally hate getting pinged with offers, then we shouldn't do them. We had, again, I don't know how many people are aware, but we had an app for food about a year and a half ago, 2 years, and after about a year, we paused it. Now, we're absolutely still looking to re-engage in the app space, but from the amount of time, energy, resource that we put into that, could we look at ourselves in the mirror and continue with that at that moment in time from what it was giving to customers? So we're looking at, forget kind of just a UX test facility in your head office. We've already prepped a mobile UX lab. We've time-lapsed it. We can put it up in 15 minutes. So we plan to go around some of the stores and be asking what members want and testing live in the environment, rather than us having produced, as an example, the food app, very well-meaning, lots of potentially good stuff in it. But if we're being honest, the people didn't use it, and it wasn't flying on the App Store, so you shut it down. So I think, and a lot of our ways of working now, again with Mike Bracken coming in, very much a believer in continuous delivery, agile, DevOps, really developing things and showing them rather than sometimes this big bang. It's very much an iterative approach. So we need to change our way of thinking, and it isn't always right.
It's a great question, because a lot of people then want to interpret saying, go digital, abandon point of sale marketing. I can tell you, for someone that studies point of sale marketing, it works. It works.
Well,
it works too.
We have leaflets. So, a lot of people, I hear friends saying, why will you stop sending me, like I'm delivering them leaflets, stop sending us food leaflets. Well, if they're fundamentally proven to work, and we've done studies that show the uplift from doing leaflets, then you shouldn't stop doing leaflets unless digital can do a better bang for the buck from an ROI. So I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater,
More questions? Other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Question for Patrick on the number of brands obviously you look after under the group. How do you deal with the challenge of obviously sharing wins and fails from digital spend? Because there must be competition between them, obviously, on Krautserg and Malibu, for example.
Great question.
If I understand the question, sorry, can you just repeat the question so I understand it more clearly? Or?
I think what the question's asking is, since you have multiple brands, maybe by spending on one or building a digital presence, there are winners and losers. And most companies are aligned around product managers. And so some people are going to be winners and some people are going to be losers. How do you deal with that challenge?
How do you share that information?
Okay.
You've got a Twitter campaign that say works on Malibu. How do you share that across the organisation and say, we should all be doing this?
Yeah, I get the question entirely. So the first and foremost, what we've got is a prioritised portfolio strategy. So we understand which brands we are going to over-invest in. We understand which brands we're going to develop and which brands we're going to maintain. That's key to it. So you know where you're going to be deploying your resources. And then the most important thing in terms of all of our digital learnings, it all comes under the umbrella of our head of digital, is to make sure that we are sharing those. So we have full marketing team meetings just like anybody else does here. We have an internal digital digest, which goes out every 2 weeks, written by the digital marketing executive. And her job is to take what's worked on Campo Viejo, being the latest cinematograph that we've just put forward, or whether it's a piece of e-commerce work that we've done on Jameson. Her job is to make sure that we're sharing that all of the time. And I think that's absolutely what we need to be doing more of in e-commerce, as we are looking to try and accelerate our performance in e-commerce, because all of those little things add up to a lot. So when you find out that just simply putting a price roundel or a country of origin roundel on wine or a serve suggestion on vodka works, then get that out to the majority, get that out to everybody. So it's absolutely incumbent upon the teams to make sure that they are sharing best practice. So I don't see it as internal competition. I see it as creating that kind of environment where people are pleased to share successes, and then people take on board, what other people are doing well.
I think it also relates to our last speaker, Dominic's talk about that's why it kind of has to be top down, because otherwise you end up with this, winners and losers, and that's not really, that's not good for the company. We have time maybe for one last question. Is there one last question? Yes, please. Wait for the mic, here comes the microphone.
Hi, I think it's a question more for Patrick as well. If you've got different digital work streams that you need to have done, and you've also got multiple brands, I'm really, really racking my brain trying to think of the best organizational structure.
Yeah.
Because how often, I'm an ex-P&G-er as well, so it's all about the brand. But today I'm thinking, how many services should I have across my brands, and how many should be within the brands to really, you can't kind of separate digital, because digital should be running through everything we're doing. How do you do it?
Entirely agree. And there is no right answer. The question you pose about how to best organise your resources against the brands, there is no right answer to that. And we're going through a transformation whereby, we've got a kind of a headcount number as such. And if you want to increase the amount of digital resource, do you take that from your traditional resource, or if what you're trying to do is to bring services in-house, do you take that out of our MP? Because part of the pitch to the FD and the CEO is the fact that we're going to generate value and reduce cost. Okay, so then that means that we'll take it off our MP, but effectively you allow me a wider headcount. Majority of our brands, so what we've got at the moment is probably got a marketing team of around 40, and they're split about 20-20. So we've got about 50% of those people are on traditional brands, and they'll be split across category, whether that's vodka, rum, or wine. And then the other is against specialist services. So whether that's insights, luxury, e-commerce, experiential, and all of those, it's kind of then a matrix-based organisation. So they all work with each other. And it goes back to one of the previous questions, which is how do you allocate the funds, whether it's in digital or in any other element of the marketing mix? You go back to the objectives of the brand. If what you've got is an awareness problem, how do you solve awareness? And that might be out of home, that might be digital. If you've got a consideration problem, that might then be another a discipline. And there's also, again, it touches on something that Paul said around, there's so much of the benefit of digital is that ability to test and learn. And I think that what digital allows us to do is to try things. If it doesn't work, close it down, stop it, move on. ECRM, we had a program, 10 brands, 3-4 years ago. Now just give us the 6 brands that we should overinvest in and kill the 4 brands, okay? Glenlivet, everybody we're talking to is over 45. Okay, where are they existing? How do we go after them? Let's put our money behind where they are, where those consumers are. Exactly that. So if I say our head of experiential, what are the 5 brands that I need you to focus on? Okay, and cut the rest, but apply your focus there. Head of digital, she can't get involved with everything. She simply can't get involved. And that's where you have to make sure your team is upskilled as well, so that they can do as much as it takes to do the right thing for the brand. But it goes back to the original objectives on anything that we do, which is one of the objectives to drive performance improvements on the brands.
I guess we have to end now, but let me just say the following. I make the prediction that if we didn't have to end now, I'm looking at every single body's faces, looking at the speakers very attentively. We could stay here all day because of the experience of the 2 people we have here on the podium. So let's take this as an opportunity to thank Patrick and Paul for really just riveting panel.